Hello, I'm Neal Reddan from the Australian Institute of International Affairs in Canberra. Here with us today is Tony Kevin, a former ambassador to Cambodia and Poland. Tony retired from the Foreign Service in 1998 and has since been an independent writer. We are discussing today the subject of his newly released book, Return to Moscow. Thank you for joining us, Tony.
Thank you, Neil.
Your book offers an in-depth analysis of Russian history and the formative issues shaping Russian national identity and values. What are the lessons we can take away from that?
Well, firstly, that Russia is a very complicated country with a complicated, often tragic and also often glorious history. It's been a major player in European affairs, but yet Europe has always found Russia a difficult country to absorb, both because it's so big compared to the rest of Europe and because it comes out of a different cultural and religious and historical tradition. Europe has experienced Russophobia since the Napoleonic Wars, and the favour has been returned. Generally speaking, Europe has invaded Russia rather than Russia invading Europe. And since the fall of communism, there have been two things at work. Firstly, there's been an attempt to push NATO forward to Russia's borders, and secondly, to absorb the former Soviet and Warsaw Pact countries solidly into a Western democratic framework, leaving Russia somehow stranded on the outside. All of this, of course, has evoked eventually a reaction in Russia, which has been widely misinterpreted in the West as Russian aggressiveness. My book presents a different picture of all that history.
In your final section, you were expecting a Clinton win. How does Trump's victory affect the themes in your book?
I, of course, wrote the book and conceived the ideas expecting a Clinton win, and it was very much framed against a background of intense American and NATO antagonism to Russia, which I felt was misplaced. I came to the conclusion, and it's set out in the book, that Russia was more sinned against than sinner. I was expecting things to get worse under Hillary Clinton because she's so closely identified with the liberal hawk position in Washington's policy establishment, and because the main people she was associated with, particularly over Ukraine and Syria, were recommending policies that were frankly very provocative. So initially, like Mr. Putin, I welcomed Trump's victory from a foreign policy point of view, and I stress that from a foreign policy point of view. I felt that he had a basic instinctive desire for better relations with Russia that, if he had the right sort of advice from his lieutenants, could be translated into a new period of détente, rather like the period of détente between Nixon and Brezhnev, or later on between Reagan and Gorbachev, and later Bush and Gorbachev. So the prospects look good. But 8 weeks later, I would have to say, people in Moscow must be scratching their heads about Trump. He seems such a weak reed, he seems so unpredictable, and he's already reaffirmed some of the anti-Russian policies, e.g. on Ukraine and on NATO expansion, that Hillary Clinton would have espoused. So I would say the Russians now are somewhat bewildered which way Trump is going to jump.
Given that foregoing analysis, what is your outlook on Russian-American strategic relations? Is a rapprochement in the offing and a possible mutual alignment against a rising China?
Russia in recent years has moved steadily and I think deliberately and finally towards a withdrawal from their early attempts to become part of Europe. They know now, and Putin has said this quite specifically, that America and NATO are not people to be trusted. In Putin's word, they tell you one thing and they do another. Putin now looks at Russia on a global compass. He's working to develop a durable relationship with China, also through the BRICS with India and other major non-NATO countries. He actually does put Russia now in more of a Eurasian foreign policy framework than a European foreign policy framework. And I think that change is going to be permanent.
Going forward, how does Russia figure in Australian foreign policy? What are the major implications?
Well, I think Russia figures in Australia's very overdue rethinking, which I hope is beginning now in the white paper process, to reset our relations towards the Asian region, to get away from that fallacy that we could have our cake and eat it, that we could have a very tight strategic relationship with the United States and a very tight economic relationship with the region. Donald Trump has made clear that that is not going to be a goer in future. We have to basically reckon with a need to develop a more balanced Australian foreign policy while still retaining ANZUS, it's obviously a fundamental plank of our security, move to have as it were, a second track of diplomacy towards the whole Asia-Pacific region. And obviously, part of that second track, new diplomacy, should involve Russia, because Russia is an Asia-Pacific country. It, particularly now that it has its close relationship with China, Russia will be a player in Asia-Pacific regional cooperation and political dialogue. And there's no reason for Australia, and this is my message to the Foreign Minister, there's no reason for Australia to go on demonising Russia. It's time that we started treating Russia with a proper respect, the sort of normal respect that it's accorded in international relations to our other partner countries in the United Nations. Since 2014, we have really behaved very badly towards Russia. We've gone out of our way to be offensive. Perhaps the low point was the refusal to send anyone to the 70th anniversary of the ending of World War II commemorations in Moscow. That was a real slap in the face to a country that lost 26 million people in the common struggle against Nazism. So I hope that we will come to the realization that Russia is part of our region and that we should have a better relationship with Russia as an Asia-Pacific country.
Thank you for joining us, Tony.
Thank you, it's been a pleasure.
That concludes our discussion on Russia today. If you have further interest in international politics, defence, strategic security issues, please visit internationalaffairs.org.au, like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter.